everyone knows the 72 seals of Solomon are a dark catalog. From the time you were young, if you heard about them at all, you were taught they were a list of demons, a forbidden index of dark forces that belong to the occult, something dangerous, something you should never ever touch. That is layer 0. That is the accepted truth. It is the story that makes sense. It is the narrative that the institutions have repeated for centuries. And it is the story that supposedly keeps you safe from things you do not understand. Or so you thought. The problem is, there are 3 layers beneath that assumption. And the final layer is the one that no one wants to admit, because it completely changes everything you thought you knew about spiritual warfare, protection, and the ancient world. Before we go any further, if this kind of investigation matters to you, I highly recommend subscribing to the channel right now. The algorithm only shows the next layers of this research to those who signal that they want to look deeper. And in the next layers, things are going to get genuinely uncomfortable. You probably know the feeling of spiritual vulnerability. You pray. You perform your daily rituals. You try to live with a clean spirit, keeping your intentions pure and your household safe. And yet, despite all of your efforts, there are times when you feel completely, inexplicably exposed. A sudden catastrophic string of financial disasters that makes no logical sense. A total collapse in your family's communication, where love turns into bitter resentment overnight. A heavy, suffocating weight that sits on your chest the very moment you walk through your own front door. You ask for protection. You recite the words you were taught. But the protection feels thin, almost porous, like a paper shield against a barrage of arrows. You start to wonder if you are doing something wrong, if your faith just isn't strong enough, or if the universe has simply decided to punish you. You are not alone in this quiet desperation. Millions of people feel this exact same vulnerability every single day. They feel as though they are walking onto a battlefield entirely unarmed, swinging blindly at enemies they cannot even see. When I was growing up, my mother, a devout Catholic Igbo woman from Nsukka, would trace intricate ancient patterns on the threshold of our home in London before every new year. These were uli patterns, traditional Igbo designs, but she drew them with a fierce, almost militant precision. She never called it magic. She called it sealing the house. As a young boy, I watched her do this with a mixture of profound reverence and deep confusion. I would ask her what she was doing, why she was marking the wood of the doorframe, and she would simply say she was locking the door that the spirits use. She knew that a physical lock only stopped physical intruders. To stop a spiritual intruder, you needed a spiritual lock, a seal. My father, a British academic and a historian of ancient religions at University College London, had a completely different view. He would watch my mother seal the door and shake his head. To him, these were just psychological crutches. He taught me that the seals of Solomon were nothing more than syncretic folk magic, a psychological placebo for people who could not handle the chaos of the natural world. He demanded empirical evidence, textual proof, and historical documentation. I grew up caught squarely between my mother's absolute spiritual certainty and my father's cold academic skepticism. I realized that if I was ever going to find the truth, I could not rely on faith alone, nor could I rely on dismissive academia. I had to go to the primary sources. I had to look at the raw data of the ancient world. I spent years trying to figure out if that practice was Christian, if it was purely Igbo, or if it was the echo of something vastly older, a fragment of a global human technology that we had collectively forgotten. That question stayed in my blood. It became the defining obsession of my life. It drove me to the School of Oriental and African Studies in London, where I immersed myself in the languages of the ancient Near East. It drove me to spend 12 years of my life researching ancient liturgical manuscripts, traveling to the rock-hewn monasteries of Ethiopia, the academic archives of Israel, the dusty libraries of Egypt, and the elders in Nigeria. I was looking for the origin of the seal. I was looking for the precise moment in human history when humanity learned how to lock the spiritual door. During my time in Ethiopia, I sat with the monks of the rock-hewn churches of Lalibela. We sat in the cold stone corridors, breathing in the scent of frankincense that had soaked into the rock for 800 years. They showed me texts written in Ge'ez, the ancient liturgical language. In their tradition, Solomon was not a king who dabbled in European occultism. He was a sovereign who held a physical seal of cosmic authority, a covenant passed down to Menelik I, the first Ethiopian emperor. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church has maintained this unbroken line of understanding for millennia. They know that spiritual defense is not passive, it is active, it is structural. When I returned to London and walked back into the sterile halls of academia, I realized that modern institutions had completely severed this living tradition from the historical text. They treated the seals as dead curiosities, ignoring the fact that they were originally designed as living architecture. Which brings us to the first layer of the 72 seals. If you look closely at the historical record, the narrative of the forbidden demon list starts to crack. The truth is not exactly what you were taught. For centuries, the academic world and the mainstream religious institutions have framed the 72 seals of Solomon as a late medieval invention, a dangerous grimoire of European occultism that belongs in the Dark Ages. But they missed the fundamental architecture of what King Solomon was actually doing. Solomon was not a sorcerer playing with dark entities for his own amusement. Solomon was a king, and kings do not summon chaos. They establish order. Kings build borders. Kings classify threats. Kings construct defenses. When you look at the earliest traditions surrounding Solomon, you do not see a man worshiping darkness or striking bargains with evil. You see a master tactician categorizing spiritual interference the exact same way a brilliant physician categorizes a plague. This was my obsession. I needed to see the architecture for myself, unfiltered by centuries of religious fearmongering and academic dismissal. So, I found myself in the reading rooms of the British Library, having gone through the labyrinth of bureaucratic permissions to request access to a very specific, highly restricted document. Sloane manuscript 2731, it is a copy of the Lemegeddon, often called the Lesser Key of Solomon, compiled around 1687. When the archivist finally brought it out to my desk, the smell of old vellum, dust, and iron gall ink filled the space around me. This manuscript is not just an old book. It is the earliest complete set of all 72 seals surviving in any collection in the world. I opened its fragile pages, my hands literally trembling, expecting to find the dark, chaotic spellbook that history promised. But as I traced the intricate lines of the sigils, as I read the marginalia and the structure of the text, a completely different reality emerged. It was not a catalog of evil. It was a precise, highly structural manual of defense. Solomon did not list 72 demons to glorify them or to teach people how to summon them for petty gains. He identified 72 specific categories of spiritual threat. He was mapping the enemy's genome. If a spiritual force causes sudden, inexplicable madness, he isolated it. If a spiritual force causes generational financial ruin, he isolated it. If a force destroys marriages, causes sudden illness, or blinds a person to the truth of their own life, Solomon gave it a name, a category, and a specific geometric seal. But wait, that is not the worst part. Because of this mapping, the entire question changes. This brings us to the second layer, and this is where it gets much deeper and significantly more serious. The reality is far more complex than a simple list of threats. If Solomon merely identified the threats, that would be an impressive work of spiritual biology. But Solomon was building a system of absolute containment. The system is dual. This is the secret that the modern world completely forgot, or perhaps was systematically made to forget. In the Sloane manuscript, I saw the true genius of the Solomonic architecture for the very first time. It is a one-to-one lock and key mechanism. For every single one of the 72 threat entities, the Godic spirits, there is a corresponding, exact angelic guardian, the 72 angels of the Shem HaMephorash. This is not arbitrary mysticism. The Shem HaMephorash is derived from the 72-letter name of God, hidden within the book of Exodus, chapter 14, verses 19 to 21. Think about what those verses describe. Verse 19 is the pillar of cloud moving to stand between the Israelites and the Egyptian army. It is the ultimate barrier of defense. Verse 20 describes the cloud bringing darkness to the enemy and light to the protected. Verse 21 is the parting of the Red Sea, the mechanism of salvation. When you read those three verses boustrophodonically, meaning reading the first line forward, the second line backward, and the third line forward, it generates exactly 72 three-letter divine names. These are the angelic counterforces. The very DNA of the seals is encoded in the biblical narrative of absolute, impenetrable protection against an overwhelming enemy. The mathematical source code of the angelic seals is literally the text of the parted sea. Let that sink in for a moment. The system was never about summoning a threat. It was about knowing the exact name and signature of the threat so that you could deploy the exact, mathematically precise angelic seal to neutralize it. We can trace this concept back far beyond the 17th century of the British Library manuscript. The Testament of Solomon, a Greek pseudepigraphical text that scholars date back to the 1st to 5th centuries of the Common Era, describes this exact defensive posture perfectly. In this ancient account, the Archangel Michael gives Solomon a ring, a divine stamp bearing a seal. And what does Solomon do with this ring? He does not ask the spirits for favors. He interrogates them. He demands to know what specific harm they cause to humanity, and then he stamps them. He binds them. He forces the very entities of chaos to build the Temple of Jerusalem. He uses the seal to subjugate the threat and turn its destructive energy into a building block for divine order. Think about the sheer scale of what the Testament describes. Solomon does not just banish the spirits, he conscripts them. He forces the entity of discord to cut the massive stones for the temple foundation. He forces the spirit of deception to spin hemp for the ropes. This is not exorcism. This is spiritual engineering. He is taking the raw destructive energy of the enemy, neutralizing its lethal frequency with the seal, and repurposing its kinetic power to build the house of God. That is a level of spiritual authority that the modern church has completely lost. We are taught to flee from the darkness, to hide from it, to pray that it goes away. Solomon did not flee. He stood his ground, demanded the entity's true name, locked it down with the corresponding geometric seal, and put it to work. And if you think this is purely a mystical invention, consider the archaeological evidence. In December 2014, excavations in Israel uncovered clay seal impressions known as bullae, dating to the 10th and 9th centuries before the Common Era, the exact historical period of Kings David and Solomon. These bullae demonstrate that a king's seal was not a piece of jewelry or a mere decoration. It was a legal, binding lock. It carried the absolute authority of the sovereign. If a document or a door was sealed by the king, breaking it was a capital offense. The spiritual application of this was not a fantasy invented by medieval European monks. It was the documented ancient Near Eastern technology of governance applied directly to the unseen world. Furthermore, this protective technology was preserved outside of Europe. In the Kebra Nagast, the foundational text of the Ethiopian Orthodox tradition, compiled in the 14th century, Solomon's authority over spirits is framed as a divine covenant. This ancient African Christian tradition maintains that Solomonic protective wisdom was passed through Menelik I to Ethiopia, where it was not lost, but preserved as a living technology of protection. Simultaneously, in the Jewish mystical tradition, The Sefer Raziel HaMalakh, assembled in the 13th century, incorporates these precise angelic hierarchies and amulets as physical protection for the household against fire, flood, and evil spirits. And here is where it gets incredibly uncomfortable. This is the third layer, the core of the onion, the part that nobody wants to hear, because it demands that you rethink your entire approach to your own spiritual life. Go back for a second to that phrase from the beginning, a dark catalog you should never touch. You know now what that phrase was hiding. You now see the mechanism of the deception. That was the convenient version, the version that keeps you totally unarmed. If you are told that the ultimate shield is actually a weapon of the enemy, you will never ever pick it up. You will leave it in the dust, terrified of the very thing designed to save you. You were taught to fear the exact technology that was painstakingly designed, tested, and recorded to protect you. The 72 Seals are an ancient operating manual, a forgotten technology of targeted spiritual defense. And the reason you feel so completely exposed, the reason your prayers sometimes feel like they are bouncing off a brass ceiling and echoing back into an empty room, is because you are using a generic defense against a highly specific, calculated attack. Imagine walking into a modern hospital with a rare, aggressive bacterial infection. You are fading fast. The doctor walks in, looks at your chart, hands you a generic vitamin C tablet, and wishes you luck. You would be outraged. You would demand the specific targeted antibiotic engineered to destroy that exact strain of bacteria. Yet, in the spiritual realm, we do this generic prescribing every single day. You are under a highly specific categorized spiritual assault, and you are using a broad generalized plea for help. Solomon understood that the spiritual world operates on strict laws, absolute precision, and specific frequencies. The 72 Seals are the specific antibiotics. They are the exact frequencies required to cancel out the interference. They are the mathematical counterweights to spiritual entropy. Let me show you exactly how precise this technology is by opening up the first 3 seals. I want you to completely forget the demonic imagery for a moment. Look past the medieval drawings. Look at the function. Look at the mechanics of the protection. Seal number 1 is associated with the entity known as Baal. For centuries, occultists have obsessed over this name, calling it a king of the underworld, a demon of unimaginable power. But in the true Solomonic defensive architecture, Baal represents a very specific, devastating category of threat: the force of visibility and illusion. When you are under this specific type of interference, your weaknesses, your insecurities, and your vulnerabilities become hyper-visible to your enemies. At the exact same time, the truth of your own situation becomes entirely invisible to you. You make terrible, self-destructive decisions because you cannot see the board clearly, and your adversaries strike you effortlessly because you are completely transparently exposed. You're illuminated by a hostile light. Consider the implications of being visible to your enemy. Think of a business owner who works relentlessly, yet every time they're about to launch a new strategy, a competitor mysteriously anticipates it and undercuts them. Think of a family whose private, hushed arguments in the kitchen somehow become public knowledge in their community, breeding shame and isolation. They are entirely visible. The seal of Baal, when understood through the protective framework, is the technology of spiritual discernment and invisibility. It is the mechanism that shields you from the gaze of those who wish to do you harm. It cloaks your movements, your plans, and your resources from hostile surveillance, while simultaneously stripping away the illusions that are blinding you to reality. It is the spiritual equivalent of advanced radar evasion and thermal cloaking. You use the seal to neutralize the threat of being seen by the wrong eyes. You deploy it when your life feels terrifyingly public to the forces trying to dismantle it. Seal number 2 is connected to the force known as Agaris. The interference of Agaris is the force of scattering and loss. Have you ever experienced a season in your life where everything you build simply dissolves in your hands? Where your financial resources are scattered to the wind through 100 tiny, unexpected emergencies? The car breaks down, the roof leaks, the medical bills arrive on the exact same day your savings account finally grows. Your mental focus is completely shattered, and the opportunities that were rightfully yours, the promotions you earned, the relationships you nurtured, the investments you made, are suddenly and inexplicably given to someone else? People call that bad luck. They say it is just a rough patch, a season of testing. In the Solomonic system, there is no such thing as bad luck. That is a specific, categorized spiritual breach. It is the entity of scattering at work in your foundation. When Agaris is operating, you will feel a distinct sensation of running on a treadmill that is slowly accelerating while the floor beneath you crumbles. You will work 80-hour weeks. You will sacrifice your sleep, your health, and your peace of mind, only to find that your bank account is inexplicably draining faster than you can fill it. The spiritual leak is so perfectly calibrated that it always matches your exact capacity to endure it, keeping you in a state of perpetual, exhausted survival. The seal of Agaris is the technology of return. It is the binding mechanism that halts the scattering. Its precise function is to force back that which was unjustly taken from you. It operates as a gravitational pull against spiritual entropy, gathering the fragmented pieces of your focus, your energy, and your resources, and anchoring them back firmly into your reality. It does not just stop the bleeding, it recovers the lost blood. It reverses the flow of theft. It demands restitution on a spiritual level, forcing the scattered elements of your life back into their rightful orbit. Seal number 3 is Vasago. The threat categorized under Vasago is the concealment of truth. It is the dense spiritual fog that intentionally hides the root cause of your suffering. You know something is profoundly wrong in your family dynamics, in your business partnerships, or in your own mind, but you cannot find the source. You are treating the symptoms because the disease is cloaked. The enemy is operating entirely from the shadows, manipulating variables you cannot see, whispering lies that sound exactly like your own thoughts. You wake up exhausted without any physical cause. You engage in bitter arguments that start from nowhere and escalate to the brink of divorce, simply because a hidden interference is constantly agitating the minds of everyone in the house. The seal of Vasago is the technology of revelation. It is the high-powered searchlight cutting through the fog. Its specific protective function is to reveal what has been deliberately hidden from you. It forces hidden agendas into the blinding light. It uncovers lost things, exposes secret interferences, and illuminates the traps that are operating just outside of your peripheral vision. When you deploy the seal of revelation, the fog instantly evaporates, and the architecture of the attack against you becomes blatantly obvious. You can finally fight back, because you can finally see the target clearly. This is not a list of monsters. This is a highly sophisticated, meticulously categorized system of spiritual engineering. It is an architecture of defense that was mapped out, tested over generations, and carefully recorded, precisely so that humanity would not have to fight in the dark forever. And that brings us to the fourth layer, the layer that touches you right now. Wherever you are sitting, wherever you are listening to this exact frequency of information, you have been fighting a surgical high-tech war with a blunt instrument. You have been wondering why your energy is perpetually drained, why your household feels heavy and tense, why your career progress is constantly blocked at the final hurdle, and you have blamed yourself. You have blamed your lack of faith. You have blamed your own spiritual inadequacy. You have thought that you just weren't good enough or holy enough to deserve peace. You thought the universe was testing you, when, in reality, a highly specific lock on your spiritual door was simply broken, and you were leaving it wide open for a specialized thief. The problem was never your faith. The problem was that you were using a blunt instrument in a surgical war. You did not have the manual. You did not know that the attacks against you were classified, categorized, and already solved thousands of years ago by minds far more advanced in spiritual physics than we are today. Your grandmother, my mother with her uli patterns, meticulously drawn on the wooden doorframe in London, they understood the core principle. They felt it in their bones. They knew that you must seal the specific breach with a specific mark. You do not just hope the door stays closed, you lock it. The 72 seals of Solomon are the ultimate, grand expression of that ancient human knowing. They are the forgotten technology that allows you to stop fighting blindly, stop swinging at the air, and start locking the doors properly. Before we finish this first exploration, I want to take a moment to speak directly to those of you who find real tangible value in this work. If this breakdown has shifted your perspective, if it has handed you a missing piece of the puzzle that you have been searching for, I ask you to consider supporting the channel with a super thanks. You are not just a passive spectator here. You are part of a very small, dedicated group of people willing to look past the official sanitized history and actively recover the knowledge that was systematically buried by time and fear. Your direct support is what allows me to spend the countless hours in the archives, translating the ancient manuscripts, navigating the academic bureaucracy, and bringing this uncompromised research directly to you. It means absolutely everything to the continuation and survival of this project. We have only just scratched the surface today. There are 72 seals in total, a complete, exhaustive, mathematically perfect system of absolute protection. Today, you learned the mechanics of 3. This is just episode 1 of our deep investigation into the Solomonic defensive architecture. In the next video, we are going to open the specific seals that target financial interference and generational blockages. You will not want to miss the mechanics of how those locks operate. Until then, I have a question for you, and I want to see your honest answers in the comments below. Be truthful with yourself. Before you clicked on this video, did you believe the first layer? Did you believe the seals were just a dark forbidden list of demons that should be avoided at all costs? Let me know exactly how your view has changed today.